Today's topic of conversation is my review of the 2018 British Grand Prix. What a race it was. What a fantastic race it was once again in 2018. I cannot believe what we are witnessing this year, especially after all the abuse we had in the first race of the season in Australia. Everyone said, 2018, there's going to be no overtaking, it's going to be one of the worst years ever. And what a load of rubbish that has turned out to be. What a fantastic season we're having. And the British Grand Prix, now, bear in mind, this might just be because I've just watched it, but for me, that was the best race of the season so far. Not the result that probably most British fans would have wanted, minus the British Ferrari fans, but I'm telling you, what a race that was. And I think the only issue, pretty much, was the final result. We had that mid-phase of the race, which was a little bit quiet, but spoiler alert is in warning for today's video. If you do not know the result of the 2018 British Grand Prix, I advise you to stay away from this video at all costs. But if you have seen, then you will know that Sebastian Vettel was the eventual winner of the race. A huge shock to most of the British fans, and I imagine a bit of an annoyance to everyone who went to the race and who really wanted to see a Lewis Hamilton win. I was there last year, my first ever British Grand Prix, my only one so far to date. But the atmosphere is electric when Lewis wins. Every race I've been to actually was a Lewis win, although when I went to Spa in 2015, he wasn't the most popular driver around there, so it was a little bit of a different atmosphere, but it was so electric last year when Lewis came across the line to win. So I'm sure on the Saturday fans were happy. On the Sunday, not so much, but blimey, they were treated to an absolute cracking race. So let's just go through with it. Let's go through team by team, driver by driver. I think that's the best way to approach these videos rather than just regurgitating what happened in the race. But what I'll do quickly is let's talk about qualifying, and then let's talk about the first lap. So qualifying, a pretty bog standard qualifying, another fantastic effort from Charles Leclerc to get into the top 10. Renault seemed really off the pace, but apart from that, most of the field was as they were really, and they have been all season. The biggest and most interesting point for me was the gap between the top three. Bottas had not struggled as much this weekend. I wouldn't say struggled. I think commentators have definitely used that term. I think that's a bit unfair. I think Lewis Hamilton is supreme around this track, and he was very unlucky. Was Bottas on his final run in qualifying, did make a little mistake, but the front three, 1/10 separated pole to third position. Hamilton getting pole position, so I'm sure, like I say, the British fans were buzzing about that, and I can feel happy for them. Sebastian Vettel P2, so the Ferrari fans still pretty happy, and Kimi Raikkonen P3, and Raikkonen really looked up and ready for this one. So we then head on to lap 1. Hamilton, an awful start, drops places to Vettel and his teammate Valtteri Bottas heading through Abbey. Raikkonen, not really a dive bomb, sort of alongside Hamilton, locks up, makes contact with Hamilton's rear. Hamilton is flung around, Raikkonen can keep going, Hamilton is flung around right the way down, almost at the back of the field. The only man behind him was Sergio Perez, who, you know what, that was a brave move from Perez, spun going through the first corner, then did a Grosjean. So what Grosjean did in Spain is what Perez did, lights up the rear to try and sort of get back on track as quickly as possible. Ended up making a smokescreen and incredibly nearly hit the Williams, that both of them, along with Hartley, started in the pit lane. Perez just nearly went straight into him. I think it was Sorokin who was the first one out of the pit lane. Nearly went straight into Sorokin. Sorokin probably had no clue what was going on. So that was pretty mad to see. And the onboards from the Williams were pretty interesting, to be fair. So Perez almost ruined his race straight from the get-go. Also on lap 1 as well, I'll quickly mention before we go through driver by driver, the two Haas cars. Oh no, absolutely gutted I was. If you're unaware, Grosjean is one of my favourite drivers. I don't really have one specific favourite driver at the moment, but I do have a big affiliation to Romain Grosjean, and if I was had to say anyone, I would say Grosjean. Really unlucky from both the Haas cars. We've seen no onboards yet, so it's not clear how the two of them hit into each other. We know they did crash into each other. No penalties were issued. It was under investigation, so most likely it was a driving incident. or racing incident I should say, but oh my god, qualifying 7th and 8th, like Magnussen said on the grid, that's basically a pole position. You know, for the midfield, the front three teams are so far ahead, it might as well be a Class A and a Class B, and Haas got that front row pretty much for the Class B. However, it was not to be their day. Contact between the two of them on the opening lap. And we'll talk about them a bit later on, but that really did mess up both of their races. So let's go through then driver by driver, starting off with the race winner, Sebastian Vettel, the man with neck pains all weekend supposedly. Started the race superbly, controlled the race throughout the first stint. He only went into second place after the pit stops when Valtteri Bottas stayed out one extra lap, which I thought was stupid from Mercedes, to be honest with you. We might as well talk about Mercedes a little bit when we're talking about Ferrari, but I thought that was such the wrong decision. I thought Valtteri could have gone for the undercut on Sebastian. He seemed to be nursing the tyres, did Bottas, so in my opinion, could have gone for the undercut on Sebastian. May have worked, but I think it was worth the risk. They didn't go for it. Then, when the safety car came out for Marcus Ericsson, which was the big changing point of the race, you know, I was watching the race with my dad, and I said, you know, they've got to bring in Bottas. They've got to bring in Bottas. If they leave him out, he's going to be such a sitting duck to those Ferraris. I assumed they'd bring in Hamilton. They decided to bring in neither of them. And that ultimately was one of the big reasons why Mercedes weren't able to win this race, was because they didn't take the gamble, which, well, to be honest, actually, I'll take that back. It was more of a gamble staying out, and arguably, if there wasn't the second safety car, then Mercedes could have made the distance, but I doubt that. I really do. I only say they could have made the distance because then it would have been more wear on the soft tyres that the rest of the drivers had. But really, Sebastian Vettel was in control of this race completely. A fantastic drive from the German, considering he had those neck pains. Yeah, really solid drive. And to win in Silverstone for the second time, yes, for the British fans, probably wasn't the best result they were hoping for, but still, you can't take it away from Sebastian. What a great drive he did today, and how quick that Ferrari was all weekend, seemed to be better than the Mercedes for the first time in Silverstone in a very long time. I think probably 2012 was the last time that Ferrari was better than the Mercedes at Silverstone, so it was nice and refreshing from that standpoint, but annoying, like I say, for those British fans. Kimi Raikkonen in the other Ferrari, under the radar for what a great race he had. Starting from third, obviously made that massive mistake hitting Hamilton on the opening lap, getting a 10-second penalty, which, although fair, very inconsistent considering 2 weeks ago at Paul Ricard, Vettel had a crash with Bottas, I would say almost identically. Almost, you know, both of them, Vettel locked up into Bottas, Raikkonen locked up into Hamilton. Vettel got a 5-second, Raikkonen got a 10-second, so I think they were pretty much identical, to be perfectly honest with you. The only difference is one was the third corner, one was the first corner, although it's very different circumstances. You know, in Silverstone, the third corner is the first braking zone. So really, both in the first braking zone, and although, like I said, I think it was the right penalty, the right decision. I think it was inconsistent from the stewards, and so I'd love to see if this happens again, what they go with. I think they've got to go with 10-second penalties. I think that was a fair system, and so definitely the punishment fitted the crime. But Raikkonen, although a bit vocal at times, benefited from the safety car, benefited from other drivers like Verstappen dropping out late on. However, really feisty driving from Kimi Raikkonen today. Really impressed with that, made some daring moves, and this was, I think, the best race Raikkonen has had since coming back to Ferrari. I really do. Really impressed from the Finn, who after that 10-second penalty was miles down. Again, a bit like Hamilton, was helped out by the safety car, bunching the field up, but still a really solid race by Kimi Raikkonen, and I think he's definitely a contender for driver of the day. Moving on then to second place. I'm getting a bit carried away with myself there. Second place, Lewis Hamilton. Moving on to the second team, Mercedes. Now, starting first and fourth, coming away with a second and fifth, probably they won't be too happy about that, to be perfectly honest with you. Hamilton P2, Bottas P5. And after lap 1, Bottas was going to be their main chance of winning that race. And I think, to be honest with you, if I'm being 100% honest, I think Mercedes were more focused on getting a Hamilton win than a Bottas win this weekend. I do believe that. I think Bottas had, like I mentioned, had two key chances to really try and win this race. The first being to try and undercut Vettel. The second being pitting and going with Vettel to the end. I think that was the real obvious choice. And that's, probably the fourth time Mercedes this season have made a stupid error under the safety car with tyre strategy, or just strategy in general. I really can't believe Mercedes are bottling it this much this season. And at the moment, that's the key reason they're not winning the Drivers' or the Constructors' Championship. It's Mercedes themselves and their stupid tactical errors and strategy errors. I know Ferrari arguably have the best car this season, but I think the strategy on Mercedes' end has been a really big part of it, and something that has really disappointed me, to be honest with you. I'm now thinking to myself that I accidentally just said that Bottas finished 5th when he didn't. He finished 4th, so apologies there. So a 2nd and 4th, but Bottas is 5th in the championship is what I was accidentally reading, so I apologise there. But still, a 2nd and 4th is not good enough, and Bottas, who, yes, did a really good job at defending from Sebastian Vettel, I thought, on worn medium tyres against the soft tyres. Vettel made an incredible move to pass Bottas. Bottas then didn't really have the tyre life to defend from Hamilton or Raikkonen, but Mercedes, another one that I think got away from them this weekend. Although Ferrari were superior, I think they did have opportunities to win this weekend, and I think with this 2-weekend break, we've seen over the past couple of years that Ferrari have been superior at the Hungarian circuit, so I think it's going to be another Ferrari win next time out. Mercedes, during this 2-week break... Actually, no, it's not Hungary. it's Germany, isn't it? So Mercedes could definitely win at that race. I keep forgetting Germany's back on the calendar this year. The Hockenheim Ring. Yes, I think Mercedes definitely will have a good chance at winning that one. The following race in Hungary, I do think Ferrari. So I think over that summer break, Mercedes are really going to have to just take a step back and really analyse what's going on with this strategy team this year. I've not been impressed, and I think at the end of the day, could undo their championship hopes. So I think for the rest of the season, that will definitely be something to keep an eye on. But Mercedes, starting 1st and 4th, finishing the race 2nd and 4th, you'd think maybe that's all right, but at the end of the day, I think this is a race that got away from Mercedes and definitely should have done better. But I just want to quickly make a note. Hamilton, one of the best drives I think we've seen from him for a very long time indeed. Last, pretty much after the first lap, fighting up to P2. Yes, the safety car helped out a lot, and really should have been P3 if Raikkonen had a little bit more tyre life at the end. But Hamilton, that was a sublime drive, cutting through the pack nice and quickly early on. The only thing there, I would say, is that most of the backmarker guys just completely got out of the way. Didn't even try and fight the Mercedes, which was fair enough in those early laps. They didn't want to ruin their own races, but again, Hamilton, a mighty drive to climb back all the way to P2, and something for the British fans to smile about. So moving on then from Mercedes, we talk about Mercedes and Ferrari for quite a while now, so let's crack on with the rest of the grid. P5 in the end was Daniel Ricciardo. Quiet day for Red Bull, didn't really see too much of them. The most we saw from those two was a little bit of a different strategy. Ricciardo went in for, was going for the 2-stop, which at the time was a bit of a rogue strategy from Red Bull, putting him onto the mediums first, then onto the softs late on, but the safety car pretty much undid any ballsiness they were going for, and Red Bull just were pretty much just left to pick up the scraps, to be honest, with the 5th and 6th, ended up in 5th and a DNF, because Max Verstappen ended up flicking the car around the club corner, the final couple of corners there, with what must have been 3 laps to go. Everyone's thinking, oh, he's just lost it, but what actually happened was a failure with the brake-by-wire, and he was not able to finish the race. So for Max, points lost again. Red Bull very inconsistent this season. A poor weekend actually for Max Verstappen, coming off a 3rd place, a 2nd place, and then a win. So it looked like he was really building up momentum now, but a poor weekend for Max. During practice, his car broke down, he had a crash, in practice as well, and DNF in the race. Not really through any of his fault, to be honest with you, a poor weekend, but still one to forget for Max Verstappen. After last year, he had a really, really solid race in Silverstone. And Daniel Ricciardo as well, I think he got driver of the day last year. So for Red Bull, a really quiet weekend. Could have been something special with a little bit of different strategy, but ultimately nothing ever came from it. Moving on to P6 then, and the fourth best team was Renault, something that I was not expecting to say. After qualifying, both cars looked really out of shape in qualifying. Sainz going out in Q1. Hulkenberg going out in Q2. Hulkenberg did a really good job in qualifying, actually, just to qualify P11. Went for a different strategy, starting on the mediums. Everyone else on the whole grid, I believe, started on the soft tyres, trying something really different for Renault. And after the first lap, contact with the Haas cars and picking up positions here and there, Hulkenberg had worked his way up to P7, fighting with Charles Leclerc for that first stint of the race. Coming for the pit stops, Leclerc went for the undercut. He ended up just DNFing, so we'll talk about Sauber a bit later on. Hulkenberg was pretty much left to his own devices, to be honest with you. Driving around in P7 for the majority of the race until Verstappen ended up being knocked out by his brake-by-wire issue. Hulkenberg inherited P6, and that's a really solid day in the office for Nico Hulkenberg. His best result of the season. Another big points haul for Renault, and I think they'll be really happy with that, to be perfectly honest with you. After Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull, they were the team that scored the most points, so they will definitely be happy with that once again, solidifying that position of fourth in the Constructors, despite Haas being the better team this weekend in qualifying throughout practice. Renault, I think, are proving why they're a long-standing team in the sport. I know they've recently only just come back, but they've always been a supplier of engines, and they've always been there or thereabout, but they're proving that you've just got to keep plugging away. Haas keep on, despite having weekend where there's clearly the fourth best team, just keep missing out here and there, and this weekend the contact between both of them really undid the Haas team, and Hulkenberg a really solid drive, and he's not going to get driver of the day for me, but this is definitely not the first time this season I'm saying that Nico Hulkenberg is in contention for driver of the day. I don't think I gave it to him in China, but I remember China being a really standout race for Nico Hulkenberg this season, so another fantastic race from the German today. He's been on a bit of a string of a few poor results here and there, so this is a nice run back to form for Nico Hulkenberg. The fifth best team, Force India. Esteban Ocon picking up points again. I don't think I saw Esteban Ocon once in the whole race. Quiet day for him. Most of the guys in this sort of area of the point, a very quiet day. Ocon, like Hulkenberg, barely saw, but 6 points, ending the race in 7th place. It's a really solid job. Obviously helped out with the Max Verstappen incident, but he's putting himself on the radar for Mercedes. It's another point score. He now moves ahead of Perez in the points. Perez, who the majority of his points came with that one random sort of fluky podium in Azerbaijan. Now, I know there's a lot of Perez fans out there, so I don't want to upset you there by saying a fluky podium, but it was a bit, to be honest with you, with obviously some top runners dropping out and making mistakes here and there. Perez, after that, I think, has only picked up 8 points since the Azerbaijan Grand Prix in the entirety of the season. Ocon, I believe, is on 27 points and has been really consistent across every single one of the 10 races. So Ocon, actually, I can tell a lie there. The first few races, Force India were very much off the pace. So since, I'd say, China, Ocon has been really, really impressive. And you know what? I don't think he'll be at Mercedes anytime soon. I think he'll be at Force India for quite some time, if I'm being perfectly honest. But really starting to impress myself. Ocon, last season and the season before for Manor, didn't really do much to impress me, if I'm being 100% honest, but he's being consistent, and if he's beating Perez consistently, then I think, yeah, he should definitely be on my radar, and I think it's one to definitely be looking out for in the future. I don't think he'll be a world champion, I don't think he'll set the world on fire, but I think Ocon's a really consistent driver, and he's proved that again today at Silverstone. P8, Jesus, he always manages to do it, doesn't he? Fernando Alonso always manages to find a way to bring that awful McLaren into the points. He's done it now for the past 4 years. He's managed to find a way to keep dragging that McLaren far, far, far above its capability. A very quiet race again for Fernando, just like Hülkenberg and Ocon. The cameras were constantly on that top fight, which is what we want to see. At the end of the day, we don't really want to, if you think about it, we want to see who's fighting for the win. We don't want to see who's fighting, for 7th place. So it's nice in a way that we didn't see these guys fighting, but there was a bit of carnage going on in there. I think Hülkenberg, Ocon, Alonso, Magnussen, Perez, Gasly, Van Dorn were very, very close in those closing stages, even before the safety car had come out. So that was nice to see when we occasionally saw them on the track. And we also had Sainz and Grosjean in there as well at the time. But it was nice to see that, to be honest, overtaking didn't really seem to be a huge issue this weekend. And so these guys, like I said, not much on air time, but it's solid points again. Van Dorn, we'll quickly talk about him, because I forgot I was going through team by team. Perez I've already talked about, really. Very quiet day for him, ending up P11. Van Dorn, ending up P12, was really unlucky in qualifying again, being blocked on his qualifying lap, so wasn't able to set a final lap time. Both Sainz and Van Dorn were blocked by Magnussen in qualifying. Magnussen, who I had mentioned in practice, had blocked Alonso, blocked Van Dorn and Van Dorn and Sainz. And so very disappointing from Magnussen again on that standpoint. But anyway, Van Dorn, very quiet race again, wasn't really ever on the cameras, to be honest with you. I didn't see any moves up or down the field, and apart from the 2 Williams and everyone who DNF'd, he was at the back of the pack. So difficult weekend for Van Dorn and Perez. Moving on to the next team then, Haas F1 team. 9th and a DNF, starting 7th and 8th. Embarrassing. We've already spoke about the obvious, the turn 1 incident, but Magnussen after that, pretty quiet race, like I've said about the rest of the guys. But the more interesting point here was the Grosjean and Sainz crash. I didn't talk about that. We were talking about Renault, because I forgot, but we'll talk about it now with Grosjean. Second safety car was caused by them, and what basically happened was after the first safety car, Grosjean and Sainz, we got underway. They're both next to each other, heading down towards Copse, side by side, and we'd seen earlier on that Raikkonen had just completely backed out of it when he was fighting with Verstappen. These two decided, no, points make prizes, and at the end of the day, Haas and Renault are locked into this huge fight for 4th in the championship, and so both of them wanting to outdo each other. Sainz did squeeze Grosjean very close to the inside curb, which was fine. Grosjean had a bit of understeer, had to correct into Sainz, and you know what? When you've got that little room, a tiny little error or little misjudgment can have the hugest consequences, and that's exactly what we saw. If Sainz left him a bit more room, Grosjean would have been fine. They both would have been able to go on. If Grosjean didn't have his little wiggle, then they'd have both been fine as well. So for me, huge racing incident. As I always say, and I said at the beginning of the video, I am a Grosjean sort of fan, so I want it to be known that I'm trying not to be as biased as possible. I do think that was a racing incident. If you're going to place the blame anywhere, you would put it at Grosjean's door. I can't deny that, you would, because he was the one who did pretty much make the contact. But again, I believe it is a racing incident because Sainz really pushed it to the limits. And you know what? If that was Hamilton and Vettel, I think that would have been perfectly fine. If I'm being 100% honest, probably the guy on the inside wouldn't have had the little wiggle, but when you just after a safety car restart, that is why Raikkonen backed out when he was fighting with Verstappen. Raikkonen was wide enough, he's been in the game for a ridiculously long amount of time. He was aware that, when you're just starting off a safety car restart, you don't want to be making those moves. You really don't. And so for Sainz and Grosjean, no points at the end of the day. A difficult day for Grosjean, like I say, who did suffer big time. Really did on that opening lap with the contact and lost a big chunk of front wing. So Haas, a very disappointing day, picking up 2 points when really it should have been 14. It really should have. If you consider the Verstappen DNF, it really could have. So a disappointing day for Haas. The final team then to talk about, not the final team that finished the race, I should say, to talk about is Williams. Again, absolutely nowhere from Williams. We saw plenty of them, actually. I think I saw more of Lance Stroll and Sorokin than I did of Gasly, Perez, Van Dorn. pretty much, I forgot to talk about Toro Rosso, just seen them, but I'll go back to them. Williams, nowhere, but we saw plenty of them. Lance Stroll failing to get out of the way of Lewis Hamilton was an interesting incident. We saw them overtaking the safety car, probably the first overtake of the season from a Williams car. Really disappointing for Williams to see where they are. Seem to have made no progress again this weekend, and I would not be surprised if they'd started already working on next year's car and have just written off this year. I think that's what's best for them now. And you know what? I think it'll be fine for Sorokin and Stroll just to keep pushing with this car as best they can to see if they can get a point and to take advantage of other cars. You know, ending 13th and 14th, starting in the pit lane, you'd think is alright, but when you realise they were the last two finishers, not too much, is it? So, hey-ho there. The final point scorer, I'll just go back to, was Pierre Gasly, another one in that big group we barely saw. He had a bit of an incident with Perez. Those were the two that were fighting side by side near the end of the race. Bit of contact. It's under investigation, so we don't really know what's happened there, but if anything, I think that it's a racing incident. I think Perez was a bit overly aggressive, if I'm being perfectly honest. I do think that's what happened there. Tried to hold on as best he could for those final points, but Gasly was able to finally get a point. He hasn't had a point for quite some time, I believe. So, good job from Gasly. A track where Toro Rosso weren't really showing too much pace across the weekend. So Gasly showing that he's got some talent, and he is the #1 driver at Toro Rosso, and should definitely be an option for Red Bull if either Verstappen or Ricciardo ever leave that team. So good job from Gasly. His teammate Brendan Hartley didn't even get out of the pit lane, I'm pretty sure. We didn't see him anyway. I mean, the Formula 1 coverage said he DNF'd on lap 2. The official Formula 1 website said he DNF'd on lap 1. I'm pretty sure we didn't even see him leave the pit lane, so a few question marks over that there, but Hartley suffered a massive crash, a pretty monstrous crash in practice, and this is something I did want to talk about because anyone who was saying that the halo shouldn't be in Formula 1, although it doesn't look the best, I've learned to just deal with it, and I don't dislike it all that much, to be honest with you. The Hartley crash did prove that it should be in F1 and it will save lives. And if you haven't seen the crash, I will put a link in the description for it because honestly it was a monster crash, and we do love to see monster crashes of course, but we also want to see the drivers safe at the end of the day. So all that debris flicking up into his face, half of that would have been caught by the halo. The tyre that was wiggling all over the place at one point did flip over and hit the halo, so that could have hit his helmet in theory, and the eventual impact of the halo definitely would have saved Brendan Hartley a world of pain. So Halo really did prove with that incident that it should be in F1, and I think questions about the Halo should stop now. I really do after that incident. That was definitive proof. We'd seen with Narai Fukuzumi in Spain in Formula 2 an incident where his tyre popped off, hit the Halo, very similar to Brendan Hartley. Everyone was saying then the Halo, that is why it should be in Formula 1. Everyone's saying now that the Halo should be in Formula 1 after this crash. So just wanted to mention that there. And moving on to the final team, which I really, halfway through the race, did not think I'd be saying that they were the team that had a double DNF, was Sauber. Really solid race from them. Charles Leclerc, like I said, in that big fight with Hülkenberg for the best of the rest title, which at the end of the day could have been a P6 for Sauber. Ended up having his pit stop, going for the undercut on Hülkenberg, which I think, like I say, would have elevated him ahead. But when he left the pits, seemed to fail to get drive, DNF'd on the spot. So gutted for Charles Leclerc, who was driving a really solid weekend after getting into Q3. Like I say, it did look like the best of the rest out of all the drivers on the grid, to be honest with you, during the race. And so really gutted for him, missed out on more points, but he is so punching above his weight in that Sauber. You go to the driver's standings, he's only 6 points behind Pierre Gasly. And so if you think about it, if he'd have actually been able to get that 6th place, that's 8 points, and that would have taken away Gasly's points. And if he'd have had 8 points, he'd have just been 2 points or behind Sergio Perez. So Charles Leclerc absolutely smashing it, but ultimately came away with nothing this weekend. The other Sauber, Marcus Ericsson, was another one fighting for the points after Leclerc dropped out. He was the one who caused the first safety car. That DRS zone in the first sector, what a stupid place to have that. Raikkonen got caught out by it, and if Raikkonen's going to get caught out by it in a Ferrari, you just know that someone further down with less experience, less talent, is definitely going to get caught out. And Marcus Ericsson was the unlucky party there, completely dropping it through the first corner, straight into the barrier, out wide. Another monster crash we've seen here this weekend at Silverstone. And like I say, I always love a monster crash, but as long as the driver is okay. Ericsson seemed fine, but it's a disappointing day for Sauber after a really good promise for points. That is your lot. That is every driver gone through a fantastic race at Silverstone. So all we've got left is to just a quick reflection on my predictions. My initial predictions was a Hamilton win, Raikkonen second and Grosjean third. Probably the best prediction I've done all season, unfortunately for me. I've been pretty inconsistent with predictions. If I've gone safe with a prediction, it's been a hectic race. If I've gone a bit out there, then it's generally been a pretty safe race. So I went for a bit of a medium sort of prediction, but getting two of the drivers right on the podium is fine. The only issue is Vettel was nowhere. So yeah, and Grosjean DNF. So yeah, it wasn't quite right there, but I did predict a pretty carnage race for Silverstone, so that was pretty fantastic. I did predict the Hamilton pole. But let's just go through the race review then. What did I think of the race out of 10? Who was my driver of the day? Driver of the day I'm going to go through first, and I've already mentioned two of the drivers who I think should be driver of the day. Kimi Raikkonen, Nico Hülkenberg, I think are definitely good shouts. Vettel as well, probably in there, but I'd say Raikkonen and Hülkenberg are my second and third choices. But my number one choice, there's only one man it was going to go to today, and that's Lewis Hamilton. Where he was after lap 1, where he finished, watching him cut through the field was a joy to watch, and almost at the end had that slight chance of the win, but didn't quite manage it. Out of 10, what am I going to give this race? The highest race I've given this season is a 9 out of 10, and honestly, if I'm being 100% honest with you, this could be the best race of the season. I've said that a few times, but I think a little bit. I've just watched the race, so it's fresh in the mind, but it was fantastic. The end, watching the four top guys, Bottas, Raikkonen, Hamilton, Vettel, all fighting was incredible to watch and to see how close they were. The mid-phase of sort of the race wasn't the best, but I really enjoyed it. I nearly gave it a 10 when I was writing my notes for this race. I nearly gave it a 10, but I think, like I say, that's me getting a bit carried away there. It wasn't a faultless race because of that sort of mid-phase of the race and before the safety cars. It was a fine race watching Hamilton cut through the field, Raikkonen getting feisty on the radio, the two Red Bulls trying to do something a bit different. That was all great to see, but still a little bit to be desired. So it's going to be a 9 out of 10. I think it was pretty obvious I was going to give it a 9 out of 10. But I think at the moment, as it stands, that was definitely my favourite race of the season so far. So a bit gutted to have not gone this year, but I imagine a little bit sombre. Despite it being a fantastic race, I imagine the atmosphere at Silverstone won't quite be the same this year because it was a Vettel win instead of Hamilton. But still, an incredible race. So, yeah, fantastic. The next race is a 2-week gap. 2 weeks, blimey. If you're a Formula 1 fan this year, you're not really used to a 2-week gap, are we? So, yeah, we can deal with it because next weekend is the double header for Formula E. Saturday is the first race of, well, the first finale race of the season. Sunday we got the second race, so it's a double header weekend for Formula E. That's a championship decider between John-Eric Vergne, former F1 driver, and Sam Bird, the British Formula E hope. So if you've not tried Formula E out before, I would really recommend it for this weekend. I should have a video coming out this week explaining all the sort of stakes that go into this weekend and sort of a little get to know Formula E guide if you just fancy tuning in. But guys, thank you so much for watching. I'd love to know your thoughts on the British Grand Prix 2018. Who's your driver of the day? What do you think of the race out of 10? I'd love to see that in the comments below. Guys, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.